Welcome to Stage Explorations, where we interview the theater creatives and artists from the theater world, those who perform on stage that the audience sees, and those behind the theater stage that the audience almost never sees. I am a journalist and theater fan, Buell Brown, and today's guest is...
I'm Jake Broder. If you want to learn more about UnRavelled, the new play, or the Global Brain Health Institute, go to unravelledplay.com or just watch this video.
When did you first fall in love with theater, and why did you have to become part of the theater world?
When did I fall in love with the theater? I think it hit me pretty young. I started out as a musician, and I knew when I was 5 that I wanted to play. That's what I wanted to do. And then that changed as I got older and became, I liked performing shows. And that became a love of acting, and then it became theater. It sort of, by the time I was 15 or 16, I was all in. But it started when I was pretty young.
When did you fall in love with writing, and when did it go from an interest to an obsession?
Writing always lived alongside music when I was young. The first thing I ever did was a newspaper called the Sloane Street Informer, which was it was a pencil local newspaper which I made when I was about 8, and ever since then I was writing stories. It's hard to sort of look at all these things as separate disciplines because it's all telling stories. Sometimes I'm inside it with my whole body, and sometimes I'm outside of it, imagining it and putting it down on paper. But it's telling stories, and that's always been the thing.
Why is playwriting format such a unique format to you? Why do you like writing in that format?
I like writing plays because because you can imagine anything, and there's no budgetary constraint. There's nothing standing in your way of actually making it happen, because it's just people in a space. And it can be as elaborate as you like, or it can be as simple as you like, but there's nothing standing in the way of you actually getting it done. And so that's part of the joy of it.
What is your writing process from the idea to finishing the play?
My writing process is, from beginning to end, is very different depending on the project. Sometimes there's a lot of research, and then it always starts with sort of like a lightning flash in the back of my head where I imagine it and I can almost see the whole thing, and it just sort of appears in the back. And it also is a needful feeling. It's like, oh, you have to do this story. And I can usually see it completely in my head. And then I have to spend a very long time learning about it and working it out to almost get back to exactly where I started from. Sometimes that can be really quick, and sometimes that takes a very long time.
Where did the story idea come from UnRavelled, and why did you have to write it?
UnRavelled had an interesting origin. It started when, it was for 3 reasons. I was listening to Radiolab, and they did a short piece about Ann Adams and Ravel. And it was one of those public radio driveway moments that they talk about during the fundraisers. I was stuck in the car until it was over. I couldn't get out. And by the time the piece was over, I imagined a story where Anne was going forwards in time and Ravel was going backwards in time, and the disease, and they had that in common, and the music and the painting, and sort of an exploration of the nature of creativity and their relationships, both in their separate worlds and with each other. And I just was swimming in it. I said, I got to tell this story. One of the people who was interviewed on that Radiolab show was Dr. Bruce Miller, and he's the world's foremost expert on frontotemporal dementia. So I wrote him a fan letter, and he, to my surprise, responded. And he asked me whether I was the Jake Broder from Silicon Valley. And I said, yeah. And we struck up a conversation about the case. He gave me a lot of material to read. I asked more questions. We went back and forth a bunch of times. And then he said, look, would you like to be the Hellman visiting artist at UCSF? And this was 2019, I think. And so I said, well, yeah. And they gave me this fellowship, and I went up there to study and interviewed everybody up there at the Memory and Aging Center, which is where Ann Adams was treated, but also it's where they do some of the most amazing research, both into the science and medical aspects of dementia, but also the care and the treatment of it on a very human level. And it's an extraordinary place. And it enriched my understanding of both what the disease is, what it isn't, what the human cost is, both to the sufferers, to the caregivers, to the people who love people who live with it. And it introduced me to a whole community of people who really just live with this in a very profound way. The second reason I had to do this story is because I think I got some skin in the game. Close family member might be looking down the barrel of this, and my grandma had it. She had Alzheimer's. And the prospect of somebody who you love so dearly losing what makes them them is a terrifying proposition. And it's something that a lot of people have to face. And there has to be a way of talking about it. There has to be a way of processing it and dealing with it. It's not something you can just, we can't just all sit alone in the dark and just be left to it. And the third reason is that we're reaching a point in human history where our bodies are outliving our brains for the first time. And brain health and dementia it's going to become more prevalent. It's going to become ubiquitous. Everybody's going to be dealing with it on some level because you're going to know somebody or love somebody who has it or be someone who has it, or we're living long enough to bump into the limitations of what our brains can do. And so we're going to have to reckon with these issues about dementia and brain health in a very real way, in a way that we've never had to before because we're living longer. So all of those things added up to me to be, I need to tell this story. I need to work on it. And I'm really grateful I had the opportunity from the UCSF and the GBHI, that's the Global Brain Health Institute, of which Dr. Bruce Miller is the head, co-head. They gave me the opportunity to do this, both to commission the play and then to take a crack at it in this extraordinarily strange pandemic-flavored way.
For those people who don't know the story, tell us the main story arc and the two characters, and also the themes of the story also.
To give you a sense of what UnRavelled is about, it's about, there is a 53-year-old woman. Her name is Dr. Ann Adams, and she is a brilliant biologist. And she's also a pretty crappy painter. And she, with her husband, has been living outside of Vancouver. And their son had a car accident. And when he did, she said, I'm going to stay home and take care of him because the prognosis was that he would never walk again. So she did. And while this was happening, she, wasn't in the lab anymore. And she said, I'm just going to paint. And she painted a lot of strawberries. She painted one obsessive thing over and over. And her husband was amused and annoyed, and it wasn't a big deal, but she wasn't a painter. So it was like, okay, fine. Then, miraculously, the son got better, and he went off to college. And so an unexpected happy ending there. So this is where we pick up the beginning of our story. And in UnRavelled, she says, look, she's playing Scrabble with her husband, and she says, look, I have a bit of an announcement. I'm not going to go back to the lab. And the husband's surprised. Well, why? Why not? It's like, because I want to paint. But you're not a painter. And she says, hey, don't you tell me what I can and can't do. And then begins she has this instinct that she wants to paint. And so it causes some friction in her marriage. And then she starts listening to Ravel's Bolero. And Bolero is a repetitive piece of music. It was written by Maurice Ravel in 1928. And it's not really like anything else he ever made. It's most of what Ravel does is very liquid. It's very impressionistic. He's like Debussy. It flows. And Bolero is very regimented, and it's almost perseverative. It's the same melody repeated X amount of times, exactly without variation, just the orchestration changes. There are people who think of it almost like an etude, or a piece that explores the meaning of what an orchestra can do rather than a piece of music in and of itself. And yet it is regarded as Ravel's most popular masterpiece. It's played all over the world all the time and has been since it was made. But Ravel hated it. So she becomes obsessed with this music and starts to paint it. And it's a secret. She keeps it a secret. And she's painting and painting and painting. And she makes up this gorgeous painting of it, which is so much better than anything she ever made before. And her husband is surprised and shocked and delighted. And this is like, wow, this is like a whole new person. And then she starts to show the symptoms. And then she starts to lose words. Her personality starts to shift slightly. It gets so bad at one point that she starts picking up the steak knife from the wrong end. She cuts herself. She forgets that she was just in a meeting and comes back again. And she starts to her speech starts to go, but her painting continues to improve. So they take her to see Dr. Bruce Miller, who diagnoses her with primary progressive aphasia. And it's a kind of dementia. And through the course of this, she discovers that Ravel had the same, at 53, Ravel was composed Bolero, which itself is the first symptom of his PPA, which he had, and he, like her, died 7 years later. And they both had the same disease, and they were both inspired by the same piece of music / art at the same point in their disease, which was a radical departure for them in terms of their creativity. And the theme of this is exploring the idea of what disease is, what creativity is, what is it to love somebody when they fundamentally change, where do the boundaries lie? And also share a story of a disease which has inside it a great and beautiful gift at the very beginning phases that teaches us hugely about the balance of the mind, in that at the beginning of this disease, language disappears just a little bit, which allows music and visualizing to come to the fore a bit more. And perhaps language is too prominent. Perhaps we're too focused on that, and that takes away from some of the other things that are necessarily having to take a back seat while language has the front of the stage all the time.
Do you think because of your more established knowledge of both music and writing that you were kind of like the perfect writer to write this story?
I don't know.
Or I should ask, because of your knowledge of music and the play, do you think you were more set or ready to write the story than others because you had a knowledge of both?
Well, what I can tell you about that is that a lot of times I wind up writing about music because the creation of it and its power is something that is obviously very close to my heart. And, you know, you write what you know. So stories that involve music, you know, hit me where I live. And I can understand them because I've lived inside that. I understand the frustration of not being able to compose something properly, or not being able to play something properly, or wanting to communicate something with music and not being able to. And so the drama of music is that it is the nature of its human expression that is both abstract and universal. And when there are problems with it, or things that want to come out through it, e.g. strong emotions or dysfunction, I find it easy to translate that into story. I've written musicals, and most of them are not sort of stop and sings, but they have the music inside the story itself. They're musicals about musicians. And this, I suppose, is a play about the creation of music and the struggle of a composer to reckon with his own legacy, and he's raging against the idea that the best thing that he ever created is only happening because he has a disease. And he knows it on some level. And the rest of the world values that piece, which is the thing he likes the least. And I don't know. I enjoy writing about and telling stories about the creation of music because I find it easy to live inside it.
Talking about living in this story, tell me about the actors and the creative team that helped bring this to this special screening.
Well, the actors and the creative team are magnificent. I'm so happy and honored to work with them. Nikki Dukas is a director here in Los Angeles who understands pacing and has such a good, austere sense of naturalism, and I really rate her. She's very, very good. The actors themselves, it's funny because the pandemic has yielded almost what I would call the pandemic players. I've written a few plays during this time, and we have the same group of people sort of dealing with them. My sort of pipe dream is to have a repertory company for Max and Willie's Last Laugh, Our American Hamlet, and UnRavelled. It's the same 8 or 9 actors who could do all 3 plays. And I just, in a way, I'm coming out of this pandemic having found the company of people who I'd like to sort of work with for the next 10 years. They're extraordinary. I'm not going to lie, I'm married to one of them, Lucy Davenport. She plays Anne. And she told me a long time ago when I was just starting to write this, she's like, I'm playing this part. And I said, no, okay. And I'm really glad she said that, because this speaks to her. Lucy's superpower is being able to track the finest gradations of behavior and emotion. She's so fine. And this is completely what this is about. This play is all about what is the difference between something that you choose and something that is almost like that you forgot to stop yourself. And it's all about, pathological behavior versus choices. And what does that mean? So it really speaks to her strengths as a performer. And then Connor Duffy, who plays Ravel, is just exquisite. He's an actor who I've worked with before, but he also is my dear writing partner on Max and Willie's Last Laugh. And then Rob Nagel, who is just grand. He's a mainstay of the theater here in LA, and he's worked with me before on Our American Hamlet, and I've always wanted to have him front something. So both Rob and Lucy are playing Robert and Ann Adams. So they're, the center of this, which is a very strong center. And then Leo Marks, who was in Our American Hamlet as well, playing Edwin Booth, he is playing Dr. Miller and is just great. He is one of the few people I know. He studies neuroscience too, and he really is very fluent in the idea of. He's very interested in consciousness. And so this appealed to him on a lot of levels, and I'm very thankful that he was there. Additionally, there was Melissa Greenspan, who is usually a very comic actress, and she brought a real sense of the brittle, angry desperation of one of the characters she played, and then the other one was a care nurse who she really just nailed so perfectly with a mix of sort of dry wit and compassion. And then finally, Mike Lanahan is doing the narration for this, and he has kind of been in everything I've written for the last 10 years, and he's just great to have around. Yeah, it's a really good group of people, and it's sort of the base of the cake of a group of people that I imagine I will be have worked with for a while, and will be working with for a lot longer. On the other side of the camera, there's Corwin Evans, who is an absolute whiz in live theater with projections, but in this whole format, he's creating animations and paintings and moving them all over the place. He's sort of in charge of the visual style of this, which is austere but kind of sumptuous because there's a lot of paintings and different time periods. And then Jeff Gardner is doing the sound, and I worked with him on Miravel, and we had a really, really, really good time because he is one of those sound designers who sort of reaches into the conceptual side of things and in a subtle way really enhances the story. In this, in the last show, I think there was some kind of, I don't know, like a fire alarm that became a symphony. And then in this one, we have one where, somebody's looking at some pages of a symphony and they are looking at different pages of it, and she can hear it inside her head, and then she turns the page, it's a different part of the symphony, but it's a reflection of the first one, and then she turns the page again, it's a different part of the symphony, and then she's looking at all the pages, and it's all playing together, and then she shuts the book, and it all sort of goes away. And that was Jeff sort of being really creative with the use of sound. And then holding it all together is Bree Pavey, who is a brilliant production coordinator and can, kept us on track and kept this sort of moving through and got us through shooting in OBS. And the remarkable thing about this is that we never, ever, ever were in the same room, any of us. Not one time. And Yeah, I was talking to Lucy about that last night. We were just sort of shocked that that actually was the case, because there was such intimacy, and yet it was all like this.
Well, very important question. What do you want the audience to get out of this play?
What do I want the audience to get out of this play? What I want with any story I tell, I want the audience to feel what I felt when I first heard it. I want them to be fascinated with the reality of it. I want to share with them the wonder and the beauty of this story and what it means. I want them to have empathy and sympathy for the people who struggle with this. And I want them to see that there is a magic that you never thought was there inside something that seems quite desperate and deadly.
Very important question. Why must the viewers watch the Unravel play event?
Why must people watch? Well, most plays about this subject are very sad, and most stories about this are heartbreaking. This endeavors to lift your heart up a bit, not just break it. And I think that's really, now that I think of it, that is what attracted me to this. This was a story about dementia that didn't break my heart. It actually made it grow a little bit. And I don't know, I think that's a rare thing.
You've mentioned them a lot because they're always sponsoring, but tell me why the Global Brain Health Institute is such an important institute, and why do you enjoy partnering with this play?
The Global Brain Health Institute is an important institution because it does exactly what it says in its title. It is a group of scientists and medical people and artists and all kinds of different folks who are concerned and are interested in brain health and equity in brain health. And they do it all over the world. And because we all have brains or love someone who does, the work they do affects all of us. And I don't know, as I said before, we're at the very beginning of understanding what the brain can do. We've been studying hearts for a long time. We can replace one with something mechanical. We understand all that. You can't say the same about brains. We're at the beginning of that mountain. And so, relatively speaking, so digging in there a bit is important work.
I probably should ask it sooner, but I had it lower down. How different and similar was the play creation comparing past plays like Lewis and Keely Live with Sahara play to a play like this? Were there similar to how you created it, or were they more different how you created it?
This play, UnRavelled, is I think it's sort of unique in the way it arrived as opposed to other plays like Louis and Keely or even our American Hamlet or Miravel. This is something that, I guess like some of them, it was based on a true story. So there was a lot of research to do. But my understanding of the story, I had to go and acquire a new sense of, I had to learn a hell of a lot in order to tell this story properly and to be able to do it in a way that kept the human part in front as opposed to having it become overwhelmingly scientific. And I hope I've succeeded. But it took me a very long time to understand something well enough to explain it simply. So there's a tremendous amount of research that I did where I just left on the floor. And it's, I got to trust that it's in there somehow because I don't get to show it in the play. or maybe it's there. I don't know. There's like the faith of that is important somehow. This was a real stretch. And this one was chiseled in a different kind of way, because every bit of behavior, every line, every stage direction, every moment was chiseled because it had to have a meaning. There's a set of paintings that track her degeneration and expansion over time. So I had to create the behavior and the relationships that made it from point A to point B that also could work on two levels. One, just two people feeling and reacting to each other, but another one was a track of sort of what the disease was doing and how it was manifesting. And so you could read it both ways at the same time. So there's a really taut wire between every little line. So this one was very chisely.
Now, I understand it's free, correct? The view, if I've read that. Tell me why it's free, and I'm assuming this is more for promoting the cause, but why it was decided to make it free. So.
Well, this happened. It sort of tumbled. It's interesting. The culmination of the Hellman Visiting Artist Fellowship was me turning in a script. And because of the pandemic, I thought, well, I can't just turn in a script. That's just too boring. I wanted to, let the people hear what was being considered. So we had a reading of it on Zoom and just shared it with people from the GBHI. And then they said, would you like to do this again? And I said, yeah. And we thought, well, I think in a way, this is, when this grows up, this play wants to be performed at, the Queen Elizabeth Hall or the Disney Concert Hall with the stage in front and then the symphony behind, because the whole evening results in a performance of Bolero with a gigantic version of the painting behind, but you get to hear a symphony do it. And what we're actually at, the dramatic conceit, is that we're at her memorial service. But you've spent an hour and a half with her, so now you understand what her masterwork means and what Ravel's masterwork means and how they interact with each other. And then you get to experience them at the same time in a room full of people. That will be, I think, moving. So because of COVID, we had to do this online, and they offered a budget to do it. And I'm serving as producer on this, and I just produced the thing, thinking that, frankly, it didn't occur to me to try and monetize this, because this was being academically, or institutionally funded. So creating a piece of work that, that the GBHI can use to make people more aware of their cause is great. But this was just sort of created. This is the same piece of work that it would be if this was being done by a commercial entity that was charging tickets. So it's free because it's free, but that really isn't changing what the thing is, if that makes sense.
Is there anything else I missed about the play or the creation of it that people should know about it?
It's one of those things that if you start Googling the story, it's one of those really great rabbit holes. So look up Unraveling Bolero and Google that. Enjoy. I'm Jake Broder. If you enjoyed this chat and you want to see Unraveled, you can go to unravelledplay.com. That's unraveled with 2 L's. And that's unravelledplay.com, and see it.
Thank you for listening or watching this podcast episode of Stage Explorations. To learn more about the theater creative and more theater creatives and artists on Stage Explorations, go to www.stageexplorations.com. Once again, that is www.stageexplorations.com. There is no space between stage and explorations. You may find more videos, podcasts, and information about this theater creative and other theater creatives and artists on Stage Exploration's YouTube channel. Looking forward to seeing you in the theater.